Hello and welcome. My name is Terry Duncombe and I'm here to tell you a story, share with you a story about my life. It starts in 1964 when I graduated from high school here in San Antonio. At that time, students were encouraged to go to college. That's what you did. You got out of high school, you went straight into college. I enrolled at San Antonio College, and I had not been a stellar student in high school, and that was carrying over into college. Much to my shock, I found out that hours spent at Doogie's didn't transfer to the academic record. Bottom line is, I was asked not to return for my second year. And at that time in the United States, we were gearing up for a war in a place called Vietnam. I had never heard of it before. But it seemed like they were needing men to go over and fight for freedom, fight for our country. One night, my buddy and I were talking, and he wanted to go into the Army. And I said, no, I'm going to go in the Navy. At least I can get 3 hot meals a day and have a clean place to sleep. So, to serve my country, I joined the Navy. Went up to Great Lakes, Illinois for boot camp. And upon graduation from boot camp, the chief petty officer was handing out orders. I walked up to him to get my orders, and he kind of smiled and said, well, I hope you enjoyed the Navy. What do you mean? You're going to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. You're in the Seabees, and you're going to be going to advanced infantry training. I'm thinking, wait, I've never been to primary infantry training. Now they're going to send me to advanced infantry training? Anyway, I went through all the 100,000 sand fleas later. I was transferred to a CB battalion, been trained in advanced infantry training. What did that mean? Well, we went over to Vietnam, Da Nang, Vietnam. I was at a little place called Rocky Mountain. It was a rock quarry, and I was crushing rock and hauling it back into Da Nang, building an airstrip. That went on and on and on. It was a pretty monotonous, pretty boring, not much happening thing there in Da Nang. Come back to the United States, and because I had been to Vietnam and I had had infantry training, they were forming up a new CB battalion in Gulfport, Mississippi. And I figured, well, Gulfport, Mississippi is a whole lot closer to San Antonio than Davisville, Rhode Island, which is where we were. So I went down to Gulfport, reported on board, and they said, you've been to Vietnam and you've had infantry training. You get to be in our advanced party. You get to go to Phu Bai, Vietnam. Now, Phu Bai, Vietnam was not nearly as secure as Da Nang. And I didn't realize it, but I had wanted to be a truck driver. So I was put on a convoy mission. We would regularly run convoys from Phu Bai into the city of Hue, or from Phu Bai to the city of Da Nang. Sometimes we would fly on helicopters and pick up equipment in Da Nang and drive that back to Phu Bai. But sometimes it got exciting. But the thing I remember most about being in Phu Bai was the sound of a siren. When that siren began its wail, that meant only one thing: incoming attack. It might be mortars or it might be rockets. It might happen in the middle of supper. It might happen at breakfast time. You never knew, but you knew when that siren went, you better have a place to hide, a hole to crawl into. It got to be very nerve-wracking. You're dead tired, you've been working for maybe 20 hours straight, you want to lay down and that siren go off. You might be in the latrine early in the morning doing your thing, and that siren goes off and you got to find a mortar pit. On and on and on. I got to where I dreaded the sound of a siren. Another thing I had to do was haul water to the helo pad in the Phu Bai airport, which is right next to a hospital, which is where the dust-off pilots brought in the wounded. And I would deliver water to that site so that they could wash out the flight decks of those helicopters. Helicopters were either bringing in wounded, the helicopters were covered with blood and body parts, and they're just hosing them out unceremoniously with a water hose. That got to me a little bit. But I finally, that tour got over with. I did get to spend New Year's Eve in the city of Wade between 1967 and 1968. There's a thing called the Tet Offensive. I'm not going to go into that. I got out and I come back to the United States, and now you have to have been born before 54 or 55 to appreciate what was going on in the United States in 1969 when I was getting out. For some reason, people acted like they were blaming me for the war. It wasn't my fault, but people didn't like the fact that I had been to Vietnam. They called me a baby killer. Very unsettling, I couldn't figure it out. Why me? I can remember a chant that at that time there was a political outfit, I guess, made up of what they called hippies at that time. Hippies and peace lovers. Like, because I had been in the military, I didn't love peace. I've come to realize that you'll never find anyone more in favor of peace than an ex-military man. But because this war was so unpopular, I felt like they were taking it out on me. It was so bad that when I was discharged, had a little bit of money, and I could have kept my uniform and flown home for half price. I didn't do that. I threw my uniform away, put on some civilian clothes, and tried to pretend that I was just another citizen flying home. It didn't work. I got to where I would not mention Vietnam. I wouldn't tell anybody about it. Looking for a job, got talked to join the police department, and I seemed to fit in and thrive in that atmosphere. It was a structured society. It had a chain of command. You were given a mission. Every night you'd go to roll call, and they'd give you a mission, and you'd do that mission and go home. It was not all that different from being in the military. There was like I say, a rank structure, a superior officers. I thrived in it for whatever reason. Everything, in fact, I like to brag about the fact that in 30 years as a policeman, the only disciplinary action I ever suffered was 2 written reprimands in 30 years. If you know anything about the police society, I also like to say I was married to the same woman the whole time. But anyway, I retired, and when I retired, almost the next day, things started to change. I didn't know what was the matter, but I never did like being around friends or had friends, but I thought that was because I was a policeman. I never did have a good night's sleep, but I'd blame that on being a policeman. I never trusted anybody, but I blamed that on being a policeman. You see, all these things that policemen go through or do was masking the fact of my condition that I didn't know I had at that time. But things got so bad that in 2008, I actually tried to kill a man in New Braunfels. He made me mad, and for one of the few times in my life, I just snapped. Couldn't control myself, flew into a rage, tried to kill this guy over an accident. He backed into my brand new Corvette. Well, my first thing I did was get rid of the Corvette, but I realized I needed some help. I talked to some of my old service buddies at a reunion I went to. They brought up the fact that the VA might possibly be able to help somebody like me. And they asked me, have I applied for benefits? I didn't know what they were talking about. On the way home, my wife and I talked it over and figured I had nothing to lose. Might as well try these benefits. She was getting pretty tired of me, the way I was acting. No friends, I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't talk to anybody about anything, not trusting anybody. But I began the process of going through the VA, seeking treatment, I didn't know whether, at that time I didn't understand the difference between benefits and treatment. I was just looking for some help. My particular battle with the VA lasted about 4 years. Those were the roughest 4 years in my life. That really intensified everything that I'd been going through. I began to, it was almost scary the way I was feeling. I talked to some counselors and it was very difficult. I remember one counselor at a vet center was asking me about all my guns. And then he asked me if I'd ever thought about suicide. And I said yes, and he asked me if I had a plan. And I told him I know exactly how I'd do it. As a police officer, I have seen lots of suicides, lots of suicide attempts. But I made up my mind if I was going to commit suicide, it was going to be with a gun. And I had the perfect gun for the job. I told this counselor that I had a sawed-off 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun, the old stagecoach type gun. And if I was going to commit suicide, I'd put that gun in my mouth and pull a trigger. No matter which trigger I pulled, it was a double-barrel gun, 2 triggers. I didn't have to worry about which trigger it was because that 16-gauge buckshot would blow my head off. And we used to laugh and joke about, was that a cry for help, or was that guy really trying to commit suicide? Well, if I tried it, it wasn't going to be no cry for help. I knew. And I remember to this day talking to that guy and seeing him turn kind of an ashy shade of grayish white. And then I kind of laughed and said, no, you asked me if I knew how I would do it, and I said, that's how I would do it if I were going to do it. I think he's still probably wondering if I did or not. But as the process went on, I was finally awarded some benefits. I wasn't happy with the decision. I think I had a total of 20%. About a year later, one of my friends said I ought to appeal that decision. And I almost didn't do it because I didn't want to go through that whole process again. And I went down and saw a different organization. My first organization that I went to was the Berry County Veterans. The second time I went was the Texas Veterans. I didn't want to, the building was in a veterans facility, the Frank Tejeda Clinic. And I remember I didn't want to go in that building because that was a veterans. They were the enemy. They were who I've been fighting, and I got to go to them for help. Well, I met a service officer there named Mike Stahl, who is, I consider him my savior. He sent me back to this doctor that did my QTC exam when I was saying I wanted an increase in my PTSD. Later learned that doctor was upset at the award I had been given the first time. Bottom line was, I'm now very satisfied with the award I've got. But I had such a problem going through this process that I made a vow to God that I would do whatever I could to help veterans. And now that's my mission. I want to help veterans. I want to help soldiers who are about to become veterans. I was introduced to a book called I Always Sit With My Back to the Wall. And for the first time in my life, I understood what was happening to me. This book explained what PTSD was. It explained how it affected the body. I wasn't ashamed of having PTSD. Now, even today, I'm not real excited about telling people that I had PTSD, but at least I know what it is, what its causes are, and the best thing about the book is it had some steps for recovery. I think I'm well into the recovery process. I still have incidences, but at least I'm aware of what's going on. I'm aware that they're coming. I know some coping mechanisms, all strictly legal, all strictly above board, that I can deal with my stress. And it's my goal to encourage everyone to seek help. I want to educate doctors educate law enforcement, educate social workers. We're fixing to have a tremendous problem in this country when all these soldiers come back from Iraq and Afghanistan as the war winds down. We're really not going to be able to cope with it. Because PTSD affects not only the individual, but it affects everyone around him. It affects his wife and his kids. PTSD affects his ability to get a job. Employers don't want to hire soldiers with PTSD because of the stigma that the term carries. But I can tell you that PTSD is not a weakness. Sissies don't get PTSD. It's not something that can be prayed away. It's not something that can be combated. It's going to happen, and then there's things you can do. Probably if I were better educated and realized what was going on when I was 18, 19 years old, maybe then I could have done something about it. But all I knew was I was John Wayne, and nothing was going to bother me. I learned different. And now it's my goal to educate others. Thank you.
I want you to tell me about your peer training. Tell me why you went through peer training, what you learned from it, and what's your goal and now that you're a peer counselor?
Well, I just got back from peer-to-peer counseling. Well, a peer-to-peer facilitator, I made a mistake when I said counseling because I'm not a counselor. I am a facilitator.
Start again. I just got back
from peer-to-peer facilitator school in Killeen, Texas. In this school, it's funny, that school was just as much about healing as it was about teaching me to be a facilitator. But we learned a lot of role playing in a group setting, such as I can expect to find when I try to help veterans. You get veterans to talk about their problems, to talk about what's going on in their life, and then when I know what their problems are, I have been trained to direct them to people who can give them help. I can't give them the help they need unless it was maybe a ride to the hospital or something like that. I can do that, but I'm not qualified to deal with people's psychological illness. There are doctors for that. But it's my job to direct these people to those that can give them the help. And my goal is to help veterans get help that they need. These guys like me gave everything they had for their country. They were willing to pay the ultimate price. Now they're paying a price for what they've been through. Peer-to-peer facilitating deals mostly with PTSD victims. Now understand that you don't have to be a warrior to have PTSD. You could be the warrior's soulmate, or you could be, PTSD is very common in cases of sexual assault. And sexual assault is rampant in the military. It's my job now to get these people the help they need, direct them in the right direction so that they can get the services or the help that they need.
People might say, you had a 30-year career in the police force. How the hell did you do that if you have this thing called PTSD? How did you function?
I mentioned very briefly that being a police officer either masks or conceals the symptoms of PTSD. Some of these symptoms of PTSD are actually very beneficial to a police officer. For instance, psychic numbing. I used to joke that it bothered me that nothing bothered me. I could stumble across a broken body and slip in the guts and body parts all over the street. It didn't bother me. I still had a job to do. I concentrated on my job, and I go home and cuss about getting blood on my spit-shine boots. But it bothered it. Psychic numbing. I was always hyper alert, always looking over my shoulder. As a police officer, that's actually pretty beneficial. Police officers as a whole normally don't associate outside their group. I was very reluctant to associate with people because I didn't think people understood the way a policeman thinks. Now that's also a symptom of PTSD. I don't tell you about my war stories because I don't think you understand. I don't tell you about my police stories because I don't think you understand. Now, of the 17 symptoms of PTSD, there's only 2 that I can think of that I didn't have. One was I've been married to the same woman for 40 years. And that has more to do with her being so strong than it does with me. And I didn't get into substance abuse. Alcohol abuse or illegal substances. And I realized just the other day that the reason I didn't do that is because if I was high, I wasn't on point. And I had to be on point to protect myself or to protect myself from perceived danger. Sometimes there was no danger, but I thought there was. So I wouldn't drink so that I could be alert to defend myself against something that wasn't there. Now, a lot of people react differently. The bad thing about PTSD is, as I understand it, there's no A, B, C, D, E, this is the way you're going to be. It affects different people in different ways. Where some people might want to turn to alcohol to drown out their sorrows, some people want to stay away from alcohol so they can stay on point. There's basically 2 different types of PTSD victims. One is the hyper vigilant, one is the introvert. I think in the book it calls hunker in the bunker and
Locked and loaded.
Locked and loaded. Locked and loaded being a military term, your gun's ready to fire.
Right.
Well, some PTSD victims are ready to fire. One of the biggest problems we have is unemployed veterans who have PTSD. And because a veteran might have PTSD, all veterans face an employment problem. An employer doesn't want to take a chance because he might have PTSD. And they got a law now that you can't ask a candidate for a job if he has PTSD, or he doesn't have to tell you. So you're not going to take the chance. You're going to just back away from it. Unfortunately, there's no one that can guarantee you that a PTSD victim is going to be docile and never cause you any problems. The sad nature of the deal is it might. And because it might, everybody's afraid of it. Now, I remember as a policeman myself, I'd be getting a call for a disturbance, drunks out in the street, use caution, this man might have PTSD. Well, I thought I was going to be going out there facing Godzilla or something. PTSD? Oh my God. Well, I began to notice that just because a guy was reported to have PTSD doesn't mean that a blackjack wouldn't talk some sense into him, would take care of him. I am embarrassed about the way I used to handle PTSD victims. But the training that law enforcement gave me didn't address the problem, let's put it that way. I understand that today law enforcement is realizing there might be a different way to handle things than I handled them in 1970. It was a different culture in 1970, an entirely different ballgame. I doubt I could be a policeman today because of all the changes that have been made.
Well, you mentioned that that right after you retired was when the symptoms worsened. Why do you think that happened?
I think that because of my military experience and my police experience, I was so used to a regimented lifestyle. Every day when I woke up, I put on the same uniform. I went to work, I had the same set of circumstances. I had the same rank structure. I had to answer to my sergeant, I had to answer to my lieutenant, who had to answer to his captain, who had the deputy chief, who had the chief of police. Much as the same in the military, but when I retired, that wasn't there. the mission was gone. It was over. I remember waking up one day thinking, I don't have to justify myself to anybody anymore. Which meant that if I walked into a stop and go or a fast food convenience store and blew off on somebody, there wasn't nothing going to happen. As a policeman, if I did certain things, well, I'd have to answer for it. Well, now I didn't have to do that. And it's just the total expanse of all control. I started exhibiting PTSD symptoms.
I want you to very briefly give 3, 4, 5 things. If you're a family member, if you're a patient suffering from a veteran suffering from PTSD, give me the top 4 or 5 things that I need to know.
First of all, I feel when I came to realize what I was and what I had been doing, I know that I've treated my family badly at times. I know I've treated my wife badly at times. I just praise the Lord that she stuck with me. It's almost like now I need to make up for 30 years. But they would need to know that there's an actual illness that I have. I know my wife as a nurse, she was very worried that I had high blood pressure. Made sure that I took my blood pressure medication. We even got a blood pressure cuff at the house. She's always worried about my blood pressure, but she didn't know that the blood pressure was a symptom. She now understands there's a symptom. I, of course, didn't know it. I now take some medication for blood pressure. I take a drug called Cymbalta that helps mellow me out without me losing control. They need to know that there's a sickness. They need to know, and this is not a cop-out. I don't mean for it to be a cop-out, but it's not really my fault. That there's treatment that can help me. The trick is to have a veteran admit, number one, that he's got a fault. Now remember, I was a veteran, but I was also a police officer. Police officers don't have problems. I solve problems. So how can I admit, it was harder for me to admit that I had a problem. But once I admit that I had that problem, then things started to level out. So they need to know what it is, they need to know the treatment for it. They need to be patient and understanding.